Hey guys, this is Wally the Trooper here with another video of explaining things, and today we are, and a slight theoretical pause, and today we're explaining and delving into the society of the Forerunners. Now, I bet some of you here haven't probably even heard of the Forerunners, but I bet there's some of you OG guys out there that know a lot about them. Still, I'm here to explain the Forerunners themselves and their inherent flaws. But before we begin, of course, I have to kindly ask for you to like and sub, or else, by imperial order, Palpatine will come in, burst down your door, and lightning shock you until you can't feel anything anymore. So if you still want to be able to pet your dog and feel his soft fur, or your cat, I'm not biased, then just save yourself some trouble and hit that like button. Anyways, so to delve in with the Forerunners. The Forerunners are a couple million years old. To explain the Forerunners, you could as well go back to the Precursors. The Precursors themselves were just an alien race that came from another galaxy outside of our Milky Way. I'm trying to wrap up real quick about the Precursors. They could be a video for another day, but basically, they came around and into our galaxy, and it's believed the Precursors themselves created life in our galaxy. So, they came in and they had such extreme technology that they were able to integrate their own consciousness into interdimensional space. They were still in many ways tied to the same dimension as us, still tied to physical planes, but they themselves came up with tons of philosophies because of their heightened intelligence from this, and eventually they created what the Forerunners, it's believed. Or it's quite possible that they just came to the galaxy and they came across other alien races that were already there, like what could have been the Forerunners. We don't know for sure, but one way or another, the Precursors kind of took the Forerunners under their wing and introduced them with tons and tons of tech. And this event, of course, Scott gave the Forerunners a huge advantage over all the other races in the galaxy. And if there were others, I don't know for sure. But the Forerunners adopted this thing that the Precursors called the Mantle of Responsibility. And the Mantle of Responsibility is basically the ideology that there should be this race that watches over all life in the galaxy, protects it, and tries to preserve it. Kind of like a single guardian across all of the galaxy to make sure everything's going smoothly. And the Precursors themselves want the Forerunners, of course, to take this so-called mantle of responsibility. The Precursors, however, started to witness that there were flaws within the Forerunners. We don't know what exactly their flaws were, not for sure at least, but the Precursors could see that the Forerunners began to see themselves quite easily as like superior over all other life forms, and as such kind of mistreated in some ways, it's believed. Either way, their hubris kind of caught up with them, and the Precursors didn't really like this so much, so they considered about handing the mantle of responsibility eventually down to humanity, which apparently existed at this time. And of course, this didn't sit very well with the Forerunners. The Forerunners did not appreciate that humanity would become superior to them. They kind of liked being all high and mighty. And so the Forerunners started trying to wipe out, not humanity, of course. They went right to the source of the problem. They tried to kill off they made like huge setouts in order to kill off the Precursors. I know what you're thinking. What, but the Precursors live in another dimension and stuff. Well, no, they can just eject their consciousness into other dimensions and some physical forms. In fact, the Precursors could even kill themselves and then re-evolve their bodies and eject their consciousnesses back into those bodies, constantly evolving. But like I said, maybe a video for another day. Anyways, the precursors ended up getting wiped out by the Forerunners because the precursors, though very advanced, kind of handed everything over to the Forerunners, and the Forerunners were able to locate them. And though they were awesome, they were very still few in number, and the Forerunners were able to hunt them down pretty effectively. There was only one left, and he was called the Primordial, who ejected himself out in like the outskirts of our Milky Way galaxy in order to survive this like little hunt down of the precursors. But like I said, probably video for another day. So now, finally, the Forerunners are the highest life forms or sentient beings in all of the galaxy, and as such, still keep the mantle of responsibility, and so they do for a couple million years. But there's a problem, of course. The Forerunners, and it's with the Forerunners themselves. Their society was mostly based around a sort of noble system. It was very rigid and and a very strict class system. So, of course, there wasn't much freedom and mobility in this. This is possibly why the precursors wanted the mantle of responsibility over to humanity. But nonetheless, the Forerunners are the supreme beings over the galaxy, but their society is extremely flawed. This is mostly due to the fact that they don't have any real system that supports individuality. Now, a society that's made for just the group, like the greater good, the so-called greater good for the group, that usually leads to a lack of individualism and as such a very extreme lack of freedom. This leads to, of course, the as seen class systems of things like forced relationships and so on, people being born into jobs and stuff. Like if you were born from a chancellor, you yourself are probably expected to be a chancellor. This was probably the Forerunner class system, but probably even more strict and rigid than this, if possible. So they themselves, of course, had a government kind of prone to corruption, and also just had limited freedom to every individual, unless you were, of course, like a really big higher up, and you were just get lucky at being born into a noble family in the Forerunner system. You can see that this is probably why the precursors didn't want the Forerunners to have the mantle of responsibility anymore, because it's likely they would have held this sort of authoritarian rule over all life forms in the galaxy. And on top of that, think of it this way. What if there wasn't really a single race with the job of the mantle of responsibility? What if it was all unified under a single government that supported all races? And the government would be supported by all of these races, and with all the equal share of technology and so on. Kind of like an equal chance or opportunity for all these races. It is possible that some of these races could be superior to others, but an equal opportunity is still seen as fair, of course. Now, still, this is probably why the precursors were trying to hand it over to humanity, and eventually what happens is humanity becomes allies with an alien race that we know as the prophets in Halo, called the Satsun. And this aka the aliens that are basically the prophets in Halo that we eventually end up leading the Covenant. Or at least select few members are. And they make an alliance with them, and the Forerunners end up seeing this sort of as a threat, but they don't pay too much attention to it until humanity starts fearing something, because apparently the Primordials themselves created this sort of biological dust in order for them to come back to life. Remember how I said that the precursors were able to kill themselves, evolve their bodies, eject their consciousness back into it, and thereby be able to constantly evolve different forms? Well, apparently they also create this thing called an interdimensional sort of dust, or a biological sort of dust, that was supposed to kind of like be like a preservification, kind of like how a mummy is preserved in its body. Well, that's sort of what the precursors did, creating that biological dust. But somehow this dust got corrupted, but humans came in contact with it and they started using it to like breed with their pets and so on, because apparently some pet that the humans had at the time, they started breeding it with, it made the pets more like easy to control, more docile sort of, and they really appreciated that, and for nearly a couple thousand years they started like nearly breeding these pets with the dust. But then people started to realize, oh crap, wait, this dust is corrupted, and their pets start acting strangely. The corruption of the dust starts corrupting their biological form, and eventually humanity starts realizing they need to kill off all these pets, but the damage is already done. It's already infecting tons of humans, and the biological input of this corrupted dust corrupting biological mass creates a sentient being out of this dust, a single organized sentient being that is capable of corrupting more and more organic mass around it in order to reproduce itself, sort of. And this is what becomes known as the flood. Humanity ends up trying to like contain it, but of course their effects aren't all that successful. And eventually what happens is that a lot of human planets end up falling to the flood, and eventually the Satsuni starts falling victim to it. So they start trying to flee away from the flood, run away from it, and they start like jumping from planet to planet, trying to escape it. And this leads to them coming in contact with the Forerunners, and they're so desperate, like trying to run away, that they end up fighting the Forerunners in order to get away, to get to worlds, in order to get away from the flood. The Forerunners don't realize this at first. They just think that humanity is, oh my gosh, humanity is rebelling against us, and they want to seize the mantle of responsibility from us. So they go at war with both humanity and the Satsuni, but eventually the Satsuni end up betraying humanity, because the Forerunners just have way more advanced tech and everything, and have way better weapons and so on. This leads to the Satsuni surrendering and basically snitching and giving out humanity. Eventually this makes the Forerunners like degrade humanity and then like put them back to the like a caveman like state, which would explain a lot. But then they realize, oh crap, the flood's coming after us. They were really running from the flood, but the damage was already done again, and the flood start imposing a great threat upon the Forerunners, who are already expanded across the galaxy. The Forerunners end up trying to contain this, but eventually they realize there's only one way to get rid of the flood permanently, and that was to create the halo rays in order to wipe out all life in the galaxy. You may know this part. The Forerunners create the halo rays, all constructed and controlled by the Ark, and then they put it in different corners across the galaxy and wipe out all life for good. But they leave like these seeds of life behind. They leave these drones and things in order to re-begin life. Once all sentient life is wiped out in the galaxy, they have all of these different machines and mechanisms bring back life and reorient it into the galaxy. But the Forerunners themselves were gone. In the process of trying to keep the mantle of responsibility, depending on it so much, fighting for it with their very lives, they end up giving up their very lives and the extinction of their entire species. The Forerunners kind of learned from this, I would say, even though they died and never could take that lesson with them much further. They ended up handing the mantle of responsibility, this time, to humanity, which actually leads to the Covenant and human war. Maybe I can delve into that about why the Covenant went at war with humanity in another video in the future. But bottom line is that the Forerunners, they weren't perfect. Pretty far from it. They had a rigid class system. They had corruption here and there within their governments and within their classes. And they were very prideful and willing to do anything to keep their power for a very long time over all of the galaxy. So much so they were willing to wipe out the precursors, and did, and they were willing to degrade humanity and probably wipe them out if we weren't like so inferior to the Forerunners already that they just barely did anything and then took us out. But I mean, I wouldn't say barely did anything. The war was extremely caught between humanity, the Satsuni, and the Forerunners was very costly, and that's what led to the Forerunners being so weakened that they could barely handle the flood. But still, the Forerunners, they were far from perfect, but they still left that mantle to humanity, and possibly maybe humanity could learn in the Halo genre, could learn from the mistakes of the Forerunners and try to implement more individualism into running the galaxy for all the races. Humans, Satsuni, Sanghelion, Yugani. You guys probably don't really know what those are, but elites and stuff, you know, brutes, so on. So that's probably the lesson to take away, that the Forerunners were not perfect, but at least they're something to learn from, especially for humanity within the Halo genre. Anyways, I hope you guys really enjoyed me talking about the Forerunners. I do enjoy Halo stuff. If you like to do more Halo stuff, or you want me to stick with, like, I don't know, other genres, just let me know in the comments, and I'm willing to take some hints here and there. Hope you enjoyed. This has been Wally the Trooper.